So the middle class was the dominant, portion of the country. It was a majority middle class country up until I think 2015. And did that change? And then the middle class is no longer the majority. Is that because of immigration?
Has a lot to do with immigration. Yes, globalization and immigration. And I think people tend not to mention immigration. I mean, people tend to say it's a mix of globalization, that is free trade, and technology, But I think that the most important part of globalization is immigration.
Why is it the most important? I mean, it affects the most changes?
George Borjas, the Harvard economist, has said that, immigration, people always talk about, is immigration good for the economy or bad for the economy? And basically, whenever you measure it, it's tough to get an effect on the economy that's more than like 1%. It's so trivial. I mean, but what the huge effect is, which is like dozens of times larger than the effect on the economy as a whole, is the transfer effect. The sort of loss of jobs by people who need $15 an hour to wash dishes to those who will do it for $8 an hour, okay? And the benefit to people who used to be paying their gardener, $30 an hour, but now find it can be done for $6 an hour. Or more likely, they pay a guy who's got a team on his truck and they pay him, $30 an hour and let him sort out how this is done. And he does it much quicker and they save money. You see what I mean?
I do.
So it becomes a transfer from the working class.
So it doesn't necessarily, I think what you're saying is it doesn't necessarily expand your economy, but it just makes the rich richer.
I think so.
So that would explain why rich people, these are broad strokes, but in general, hate any conversation about immigration, immediately go to motive, you're a racist, and just aren't at all interested in talking about it at all, and why working class people really resent it. There may be other reasons too, but that seems like a big reason.
Yes, those are broad strokes, but I think they're roughly accurate. There's there's a French sociologist named Christophe Guillouis who's written books about how this has worked in France, and his thinking has really clarified mine on this. But, you basically in France, you have 20 cities that are like nodes of the global economy. And they like in Toulouse, you have Airbus, and where there are engineers and executives at Airbus, they have, African gardeners and there are nannies and there are all sorts of people there. It's a global economy niche. When you get out into the countryside, none of that stuff touches anything. It's basically the economy consists of like returning, cans to the grocery store. This explains why, if you live in a place like Washington, D.C. or Berkeley, California, or Boston, people are like sincerely puzzled. They say like, how did Trump win? I don't know anyone who voted for him, and they'll say something like, no, really, I've talked to people of all classes. I didn't vote for him. My mother didn't vote for him. My nanny, from Jamaica didn't, who's not naturalized and didn't vote. She didn't vote for him. And the answer is the dividing line is not between rich and poor. It's between the beneficiaries of and the excluded from the global economy, right? That's the dividing line in the politics.
So when you give up open borders, you're really giving up like a whole way of life.
You give up the solidarity between classes in your country.
Huh. What does that mean?
I don't know. As soon as I said it, I realized that what you could look at it in a different way. I mean, you give up a dynamic that brings the classes close together, which is that the ability of working class people to withhold their labor for more money.
Right.
You know what I mean? You undercut that. They become, it's why trade unions, when they were actual industrial unions and not arms of the Democratic Party,
Right.
were, they equated immigrant labor with scab labor. That was
Well,
what
they were behind the immigration restrictions
Yes.
of the 1920s. You probably heard about 8 Sleep. Lots of people are talking about it. It is a company with one mission, improving your sleep. And it's changing the way people do that, the way they get a good night's rest. We just got word that their team is launching a new product. It's called the Pod 5. It's an original and innovative mattress cover plus a blanket that uses precision temperature control to regulate your body's sleep cycles and give you the perfect sleep, which really, really matters. It can range all the way from 55 degrees to 110 degrees, meaning that you're covered no matter what. It's like electric blanket to the next level, but also a cooling blanket. So it makes you sleep better. Temperature has a massive effect on the way you sleep. By the way, it also detects snoring. And then it adjusts your bed position to reduce or completely stop it. So there are a lot of ladies in America who are going to be grateful for this product. Everybody who works here will tell you, because they all use it, that there's no better way to be alert, productive, and happy than by sleeping well. And 8 Sleep really does help. Visit 8sleep.com/Tucker. Use the code Tucker to get $350 off your Pod 5 Ultra. If you don't like it, you return it within a month. That won't happen. We think you'll love it, but you can if you want. 8sleep.com/Tucker.
So you give up that dynamic, but it's very tempting, there are other ways to look at it, but yeah, I think that's basically the best way to look at it.
Will China ever decide, as its economy matures and cools inevitably, that it needs mass immigration into China?
I don't know much about China. I know a little more about Japanese. China has had a tremendous amount of internal labor migration,
yes.
which is just about to come to the end of. And so its labor costs are going to rise. I don't know how it's going to react. It's very interesting that Japan has chosen, a tightening economy over a diversifying society. That is, they've kept out immigrant labor for the most part, and where they've admitted it, they've tended to do it on a temporary basis. You get a few Filipino nannies, and they send them home at the end of their term.
The only mass migration they've had in the last 100 years has been from Korea, which they controlled until 1945, and then the Koreans who stayed kind of pretend they're Japanese.
Yes. So, I think that, and
how's that trade worked for them?
I think it's worked well for them. I think it's worked for them. The United States is constantly, the United States has brought tremendous pressure on Japan to admit immigrants. And this is one of the things that I find, this is one of the things I find quite mysterious. But if you look at the pressure that this is one of the things that I think that USAID did. It's sort of an ideological arm of the country. But if you look at not just programs, but people in the United States diplomatic corps in the State Department were always sort of like browbeating Viktor Orban in Europe, for instance, for not being more welcoming of immigrants. So I think we're at the point now where we're in a moment of transition. But Japan is deeply in debt. I believe they have the largest per capita debt in the world, although it is all to themselves. So it's debt to the. So it should be workable, but there's still a Japan. And, as we've discussed, Japan decided that it valued its cultural continuity more than European countries did. And so Japan, if you go there, you'll discover is still, I think, the Japan that people who went there 20 or 30 years ago remember it as.
So that, I mean, they seem like the only smart country like in the world, because that does seem, no one's starving in Japan. Actually, Japan is infinitely nicer than New York, for example. Sorry. And Tokyo is. And even though it's bigger and more crowded.
Yeah.
I just wonder, like, is that, like, that just seems like the greatest win to me.
They think so because they continue to keep this policy, and there's not a lot of agitation for changing it, you know. But I don't know. It's been a few years since I've been there.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.